So it's crazy when you actually dive in, you can see that there are a myriad of religious-based questions that are intersecting with this topic if you think about AI over and above just how I could use it in my everyday job. In other words, I
Right.
don't think the valuation of human life is something that we should ever allow AI to do. It's really good at analysis, but we need to decouple that from the decision aspect of what the conclusions of that analysis result in.
So, what do you think? Has science and technology made your faith irrelevant? How does your faith intermingle with your technology? Our guest today is going to give you lots to think about. Voices of WIA is just one of the many ways that Women in Apologetics strives to educate, equip, and encourage women in Christian apologetics. So, if you love Voices of WIA, then I invite you to join our free email community where you'll receive apologetics resources every single week and enjoy email community only benefits like exclusive digital guides and a discount to our annual conference. And, girlfriend, if you have not been to our annual conference, you need to go. You can sign up today by visiting womeninapologetics.com/email community. Our guest today is Kristen Davis. She's the founder of Doubtless Faith Ministries and she speaks internationally. She graduated with highest honors from Liberty University with a Bachelor of Science in Religion. She has a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics, also with highest honors from Biola, and a PhD in Philosophy of Religion from Southern Evangelical Seminary, where her dissertation was on the intersection of AI and religion. She's the senior software development manager for a division of a financial tech company and has worked in software development since 2007. But her passion is to defend the truth of Christianity through philosophy, technology, and archaeology. And her website is doubtlessfaith.com. Please welcome Kristen Davis.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here with you today.
Hi.
Thank you.
Me too. Honestly, this is such a fun conversation. Artificial intelligence is so timely and so relevant. And I would imagine that most people think that doesn't even have anything to do with Christianity. Why would they even have somebody talking about those two things? So I think this is going to be a great conversation. And to kick us off, I think your background is so rich with your various educational experiences. Can you just take a minute to kind of catch us all up to speed and tell our audience a little bit about who you are and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, it's actually a funny story. I was raised in a church and Christian school. I was a Christian because it was the most exclusive. However, it didn't really have a whole lot of feet underneath it and a whole lot of grounding because I wasn't 100% convinced it was true. And
Okay.
so when I went away to college, I fell away, not because anybody challenged my faith, but because it wasn't fun to do all the Christian things and live by the rules when everybody else was doing all that stuff.
Sure.
Anyways, long story short, I had always loved my Bible classes, and so I ended up in a situation where I had the opportunity to go to Liberty while I was waiting to finish my other degree. And I took a biblical archaeology class and a creation science class that was a game changer for me. And that's when I really came to faith. I answered all the questions I didn't even know I had. And so then the rest of my degrees have actually just been me wanting to learn more about God. And that was where I was growing in my faith rather than in church. And so for a long time, that's where I was actually going rather than church. Eventually, I found a church that I got plugged into. Um, but when I was finally trying to land a PhD dissertation topic, someone came to me and said, well, have you ever considered your software development job and the intersection of that and art and apologetics? And that had never occurred to me. And it took me down this rabbit hole that has resulted in my dissertation and a lot of other talks that I've been doing since then.
Well, I think it's fascinating. It certainly would have occurred to me either that there was anything to even research regarding apologetics and artificial intelligence. So, really quickly, before we move on, What exactly are the connection points? Why does that have a basis? Why is there something there that we need to consider?
Yeah, it's really fascinating because there's actually a ton of conversation going on around religious based topics in artificial intelligence. So people are asking, would artificial intelligence be evidence that humans don't need something unique to explain or something to explain our uniqueness? So could it be evidence of atheism that Darwinian evolution is true? Other people are having conversations about, well, if we could create a humanoid robot that was no different than a human in the way it functioned in society, would God grant it a soul? Would we have to evangelize it? Others are talking about what would be the ethical implications if we were able to create something like that. For example, would it need special rights to protect it so that it could be allowed to have a job in the same way that we have protected minorities? What would it mean for us to be able to upload our consciousness into a machine? Would we be able to live forever and thereby bypass the problem of evil, the problem of suffering, the problem of death? So it's crazy when you actually dive in. You can see that there are a myriad of religious-based questions that are intersecting with this topic if you think about AI over and above just how I could use it in my everyday job.
Okay, so Kristen, if I understand you correctly, what it basically has to do with is the fact that artificial intelligence, especially the intelligence part, has to do with some sort of created thing that essentially mimics life. And so, because it mimics life, that becomes a theological issue, or at least it potentially is a theological issue. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. So within the artificial intelligence conversation, there's a couple of different philosophies. There's the philosophy that what we would build would only ever be a tool for people to use, and that would be considered narrow AI philosophy. And they're not trying to create anybody who is holding to this position is not trying to create something that would be a living being. But there are two additional categories over and above that. One would be called artificial general intelligence, or AGI is the way it's referred to. And that's the idea that we're going to create a conscious or sentient being, something that would be a peer with humanity that could function in the world in the same way that a human can function. Typically, you'll hear people use that AI term, and they're referring to this, but they don't pick their particular category that they're talking about. But the third category is actually over and above a human. So it's artificial ultra intelligence or artificial super intelligence. And that's the idea that we can create something that's superior to humanity. And there's a lot of, are we creating a God conversation in that realm as well? So if anybody is functioning in the narrow AI category, they're just thinking about a tool, but these other two definitely have religious implications for us.
Okay, that is really interesting because I don't know that I would have thought about that specifically, but now that we're talking about those issues now that, and two, I wasn't all that familiar with AI until recently, and now that I kind of understand how AI works, I can totally see how people would be interested in the possibility of uploading their conscience, like you said, their consciousness in some way to some sort of an AI instrument or AI data bank or however that would work, with the idea that that would overcome death. So,
Mm-hmm.
in that sense, then it would become kind of like a counterpart or a competitor to the idea of everlasting life, or
Mm-hmm.
like you were mentioning earlier, the struggle with evil. If we could potentially, um, if we could do that, then we wouldn't necessarily need salvation as we think of it in religious terms, because we would just live forever.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. And I bet your average Christian hasn't really thought that far ahead. Do you think?
No, no, not really. And it's funny because it is playing out in Hollywood already. So there's a TV show that Amazon put out a couple of years ago called Upload, and I think there's 3 seasons to
Yeah.
it. And it plays with this very idea. And there's one of the main characters is like fighting with her dad because she's like tech support for this AI retirement home. And she wants her dad, who's like at end of life, to upload himself so she can continue to be there for him through, and have a relationship with him after his earthly life ends. And he's like, no, like I want to go be with your mom in heaven. And so this is playing out in our in Hollywood in relation to the AI conversation.
That is really interesting. I have seen a couple of episodes of that show. I haven't seen a lot of it, but I did think that was kind of what drew me to it, is that idea that there was this theological conversation happening in it.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of us who are kind of new to this conversation, we're not necessarily early adopters of technology. We don't necessarily know the nuanced conversations that happen in these industries. Can you kind of tell us the top 2 or 3 questions or categories of investigation or challenges that are in this area that we as Christians might want to be aware of?
Yeah, I think one of the main things that I like to highlight to people when I have the conversation is that we need to check what we hear coming out of Silicon Valley. So there have been a handful of really inflammatory kind of comments that have come out in the last few years. Like there was one where an engineer from Google said that the Google's Lambda's chatbot was sentient, and he provided this printout. And if you read it, you would not necessarily be able to tell that he was interacting with a chatbot. And so it ended up getting extremely emotionally manipulative towards the end of it. But we've also had additional people come out of Silicon Valley saying the same kinds of things. And one of the things I would like to caution everybody is check that. Don't, just because it's coming from someone who is considered a reputable tech giant and that they are very successful in the technology innovation arena, does not mean that they understand from a philosophical perspective what that has actually been built. So take what they have said and go and let's do some further research, because one of the things that I think is really important to the whole AI conversation, regardless of what angle we're going at, ethics, nature, implications for religion, whatever, one of the foundational things is unless we know the nature of what the thing is, we cannot know the implications of it. And so that's what my dissertation was on. Let's look at the nature of artificial intelligence alongside the nature of humanity, what constitutes a human and all the aspects of that from a philosophical perspective. And if they're not wholly equivalent, even if they can function in the world in the same way, they can't be considered stand-ins for one another to answer questions about each other.
Okay, that's really good. I think that's very helpful. And I think too that we as the church are going to have to step up and kind of find those people. Probably you'll end up being one of them who will kind of lead the conversations, because this is not, for instance, my 84-year-old mother may or not ever really understand or be interested in having this conversation in the church, and how it relates to our faith. But there are those who will and who do, and who would be very helpful at kind of bridging the gap between what is being said in the world about AI and its uses, and how we can actually temper that with biblical truth.
Yeah. And there's one thing I think I would also say when I talk on this, I often hear people say, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. And what they usually mean when they say that is we should stop this AI thing in its tracks and we shouldn't do it. The problem is, though, even if we as Christians decide we're not going to be involved, others are. And even if our government decided that the United States wasn't going to be involved, other governments would. And so if we decide that technology's gone too far, we're not going to be involved, we're going to get left behind. And the problem is these systems are trained on data, and the decisions, I hesitate to use that word because it's a human word, but the decisions or the outcomes or the conclusions that are drawn from the research that these algorithms provide are going to be based off the data sets that these algorithms were trained on. And if Christians are not involved in the building and training process, it's not going to be our values that are trained into these systems. And so I think it's very important that we don't take a hands-off approach, because we've seen other groups of Christians throughout history have done that, who now have the ability to speak into the cultural conversations that are taking place.
Yes, that makes actually a lot of sense when you understand that worldviews are like links or connectors. That if you believe A, then it's going to lead you to a certain subset of following decisions, and it's going to leave out other decisions. And so, if we have these systems, if I understand you correctly, if we have these systems that are making decisions for people and are involved in, whatever it is, whatever industry they're in, if we don't have Christians at the seat at the table, then there are going to be certain things that automatically get left out from a secular perspective, and we really don't want that to happen. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree with that. That's 100% the case. I also think that it's really important for us to keep in mind, how do I want to word this? Keep in mind that these are just a tool. And so we need to make sure that we're engaged, we're using them, we're involved in the whole process. But we also need to make sure that we are not allowing this thing to be considered an expert, but asking it for its sources and validating it for ourselves. That's one of the things that's notorious with AI is something called artificial intelligence hallucinations, which is essentially the idea that it's a language modeling process. So it's been built to model human language and trained on the style of human language, such that if I get this prompt, this is the kind of output I get. So if it runs up against the edge of the information it has, and it doesn't have an answer that's a truthful answer,
Okay.
it will make something up in the style of the format it's expected to deliver. And so this has been proven because people have said, well, can you give me the sources for that? And then it will make up those sources. People will try to go look those sources up, and they don't exist because it knows how to format a source. And so one example is I was trying to see if a different wood grain would match the furniture I have in my house. And so I'm complementary colors. So I started Googling, would these wood grains match each other? And the Google AI came back and it gave me this long explanation about how they're complementary colors and this, that, and that. And I went and I looked at the underlying sources, and that source had the two different wood grains I was talking about in the article, but they weren't talking about them together. And so it pulled those out and made its own summary that wasn't actually truthful. And so that's kind of what it does, is it's looking for resources that have bits of the information that are relevant and trying to connect them. Sometimes it does a really good job, and sometimes it doesn't at all. And so we need to be using them more like as initial research engines rather than assuming that it is giving us 100% accurate information.
Okay. That is really helpful. That's a very keen insight. So if we as Christians are going to be responsible users of AI, if we're going to be responsible in how we talk about it, vote about it, kind of our general attitude toward it, what do we need to be aware of? What kinds of things can we study? What kinds of things do we need to consider? How do we educate ourselves, for lack of a better term, so that we can stay technologically savvy and biblically faithful at the same time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say the best thing you can do is go try and use these things, but also fact check them. So when it gives you information back, go look at the sources and make sure that what it gave you is accurate. Mm-hmm. So that would be the first thing that I would say. You'll also become less afraid of it the more you use it. And so part of, I think, the problem is that there is a lot of fear. And if we are not involved in it, Christians are going to be left behind in business workplaces and stuff like that. The other thing I think we should keep in mind is that I think there should always be an air gap or a human gap. I'm not entirely certain how to word it, between the analysis AI and the pull the trigger AI. So what do I mean by that? There are highly, highly sensitive systems in our government or in our banks or whatnot that they have what we'll call an air gap. This system is not on the internet because the execution of whatever is done on this system is so dangerous or so high risk that they don't want to allow any chance of hacking. And so in order for someone to do whatever that system does, they have to physically walk into that room and do whatever the thing is, okay? I think the same kind of concept needs to be applied with AI. AI is doing a great job at looking at x-rays and coming up with novel diagnoses to things, and being able to navigate drones in a way that allows us to identify things or handle military situations that would be really risky for humans. But I think there should always be a human who's the one who pulls the trigger or the human who's the one who makes the decision about, well, we have diagnosed this person with such and such. This is the treatment we should be willing to do. So in other words, I don't think the valuation of human life is something that we should ever allow AI to do. It's really good at analysis, but we need to decouple that from the decision aspect of what the conclusions of that analysis result in.
Yes, I can totally see that. I have even done it on a much, much smaller scale. I've given it assignments like, I want you to go find 100 blog posts on this topic, like toward pro a certain idea, and then find another 100 on this one. I don't want it to tell me which one is right. I just want it to give me a summary of the arguments on both sides so that I can then follow up. So it's a time saver, really, so that then I can follow up and pick my favorite blog posts on each side and build an argument or an article or whatever I'm doing from there, as opposed to having it tell me, you tell me what these articles mean for me.
Yeah. Yes,
essentially.
I think that's perfect. I tend to look at it more like the improvement that came with being able to do research in a search engine on your computer versus having to go to the library and use a card catalog. Like
Right.
that's what we're talking about here, but you still have to validate what you
Yeah.
get back from it. And that should be a principle in your life anyways. You shouldn't necessarily take what anybody says without some sort of validation.
Absolutely. Golly, that's so complicated. It's so interesting because it just moves so quickly. They just do their work so quickly. And I'm sure that future iterations are going to happen one right after the other. And so we just need to be aware of that. So, um, is there anything that you can request or that you can recommend for us as Christians to help us just kind of, like you say, not be afraid to tackle this issue, to be thinking about this issue? Are there good resources? Are there things that we can begin to do now so that we can stay a little more even headed as we move forward?
Uh, Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of resources on this right now. There are a couple that have come out from Reasons to Believe,
Okay.
like Humans 2.0. Also, I'm trying to think, there was another book um, that was done. I can't think of the title off the top of my head. They're good in helping you kind of start thinking about these different concepts, but there's this is still just like so new that there's not a whole lot of resources. So I do want to recommend, if you have questions, feel free to email me from my ministry at any time. But another thing that I wanted to kind of draw out is that I think it's really important for us as Christians to make sure that we are learning the skill sets that we are taking advantage of AI for as well. So one of the things that I think is going to be a problem in the workforce in 10, 15, 20 years is AI is taking the entry level positions. Like it's doing the work of the unskilled labor in these office jobs. And so as a result, the people who are the seniors and the specialists in their positions are having to come in and correct things oftentimes. But if the people who are entry level do not learn the skill set, we will in 20 years time have all of our seniors who have retired, and there will be a huge gap of people who haven't learned through that process of aging through the system and the experience of that. So I want to encourage us as Christians, even if AI can do some of these things for you, I would still learn the underlying skill set. It was really funny when I was first learning to code. I didn't know that there were applications that you could use to help you code faster that would predict like this is what you should do here. I didn't know about that, and I coded everything by hand in a text file without any predictive suggestions. And I remember talking to a senior level developer, and he's like, "Why don't you use this tool to help you and make you go faster?" And I was like, "Well, I want to make sure that I learn the language so I actually understand what I'm doing." And he was blown away. I didn't mean anything by it. I was just like, I had just was straight out of school, and I was like, I need to know this so that I am good at my job. And he was blown away because he was like, "You are next level." Because most of the developers use this kind of like auto predict help you code software, and so they don't ever actually learn the foundational aspects of the language. I think the same thing is something that we should make sure as Christians we do. Even if we can use AI to do something faster, I think we first need to make sure that we're learning the skill set underneath it, and then we're using AI to speed us up rather than depending on AI for the skill set that we don't currently possess, because then we will be in a much better place for being able to be influential later down the road.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. So we it wouldn't be necessarily a bad idea to use AI as some kind of assistant, but at least know the skills so that, because otherwise, how would you even know how to go back and correct it if you don't understand what it's supposed to be doing for you?
Yeah.
Then you wouldn't know how to necessarily go back and correct it if there was an issue, or if you needed to investigate it and see what decisions it had made. I think that's a great suggestion. I know it's all complicated, but I think those are really great suggestions. You also mentioned contacting you at your ministry. So tell us a little bit about your ministry.
Yeah, so I am very passionate about helping people have relationships, feeling confident in their relationships with God. There are people who wrestle with feeling connected to God, whether they're like inclined towards Christianity or have been in Christianity their entire life. And there's a variety of reasons, I think, for why that happens. Some of them are intellectual, and that's where apologetics is super helpful. And then some of them are emotional based as a result of experiences with other people that they're projecting on God or themselves, or experiences that they've had with the church. And so I do workshops and classes, as well as one-on-one coaching with people who would like more intimacy with God than they have, and help them identify whatever the root is of their particular thing that they're wrestling with, and how to move past that so they can have the intimacy with God that they're looking for.
That's really great. I mean, I'm sure you already know that knowing God and being confident that you have the right idea of who God is really important, really crucial
Yeah.
for spiritual growth. Is that kind of what most people, when they come to you and they have issues they want to work out, is that kind of where they land in that kind of
Yeah.
idea?
Yeah. So some people I'll talk to, they just have wrong information. So I give them a book or two, and then they are on track, and they are able to connect with the Lord. Some people, they have, oftentimes we kind of, the way the Lord, I think, set up relationships in general is we tend to view our parents as God, and we're meant to do that at a certain phase in our life, but they are supposed to show up as fallen at some point to redirect us as we mature to the actual God. And sometimes I think people get stuck in that because so they start to see God as father, and they project what their experience with their parents was like on God. And so sometimes it's helping them like listen to the Lord and correct whatever those views are, so that the Lord is like, no, actually, this is what fatherhood looks like, and how I can be a good God, even though I've allowed whatever to happen. So yeah, it's helping people navigate through whatever the thing is that is standing in the way of them being able to take that next step in connection with the Lord.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. That's really so rich and healthy. I'm so glad that you're doing that because I totally get that. The first time I ever heard a preacher say that we very often will take whatever our parenting relationships are and we will project that onto God, I thought he was nuts because it seemed like to me that parents are such a tangible human thing and God isn't. He's so much more distant and so much bigger. I thought nobody actually sees a connection, but he was so right. Is
Yeah.
that, and especially as our families continue to deteriorate, many people, the whole idea of authority, the whole idea of education, the idea of being shaped and corrected is just so negative because their
Yeah.
family experiences are negative. They assume that the God over all of it would be just as ugly and just as hurtful and just as kind of empty as maybe their family situation was. And when
Yeah.
really they're just operating on bad information because
Yeah.
he is the hierarchy. And when people, I think a lot of people think that being a Christian is like kind of joining a gym. You kind of get the code
Yes.
and then you get to
Yeah.
come in and use the equipment. And in reality, he's creating a family. That's the
Yeah.
reason he created a human family is because his spiritual people are his family. And
Yeah.
so I love that you're doing that. So what is the future
Mhm.
like for Doubtless Faith? Where can people find you and what does it look like? What's next on the agenda for your ministry?
Yeah, so you can find me at doubtlessfaith.com. A lot of my events are done virtually, though I am willing to come and travel if people want to invite me to come speak at their church or do a workshop. I have two workshops planned right now. One of them is in on the 19th, and then another one is going to be in August. Yes, in August. They're already posted on my website. One of them, they're about connecting in relationship with the Lord. What are some of the roadblocks that get in the way of that? And how does my view of the Bible impact my relationship with God? I also have a book study that I'm going to be doing in May. If people want to join in on that, that'll be a virtual one as well. So people can join my mailing list because I'm going to start becoming a lot more intentional about doing consistent workshops and virtual events. I also do one-on-one coaching. So you can find that information on my website as well. So if you would like some help, if you feel stuck in your walk and you would like someone to help you move forward in that, feel free to reach out through my website as well. We can do a one-on-one.
That is great. Can you tell us what the topic is for your Bible study or your book study in May?
Yes. So it's a book called Living Fearless, and it's basically about identity. It's a book by the organization called Identity Exchange. I'm using their resource, and the idea is like exchanging the identities of the world for the identity that you have in Christ.
Oh,
and helping
great.
flesh that out.
Okay. And so again, if anybody's interested in that, it's doubtlessfaith.com.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Kristen, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation and such a unique conversation, a specialized conversation. I just love that. And I love that you're calling Christians into the conversation and into that area and encouraging us not to be fearful. So thank you very much for the conversation today and for dropping by our show.
Thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Good. I'm glad. Thank you so much. All right, you guys. WIA, if you don't already know, has so many resources available for you: articles, videos, social media posts, quick guides, courses. You may not know that we have online courses available for you, and merchandise. So, to see what we have available, or to donate to the work we do, or just become a member of our community, please visit our website at womeninapologetics.com. And if you have been impacted by Voices of WIA or any of the resources that we do have, we wonder if you would be willing to consider partnering with us through a monthly gift, because your support then helps us continue this vital work and reach even more women with the tools that they need to stand firm in their faith. And you can make a difference today by visiting womeninapologetics.com/donate. So, from everybody here at the WIA team, thank you so much for joining us today in this video, and we hope to see you in the next one.